The White Light over Hiroshima. August 6, 1945, Hiroshima, Japan, 8:10 a.m. The air over the city is already hot even this early. Cicadas scream from the trees that line the dusty road, their shrill chorus mixing with the distant rattle of streetcars and the soft murmur of workers' voices heading to their shifts. You can almost feel the humidity clinging to the cotton of their shirts, the weight of another wartime morning pressing down. Tsutomu Yamaguchi adjusts the strap of his worn leather briefcase on his shoulder and wipes a line of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. 29 years old. A draftsman for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, he has spent 3 long months in this city far from his home and family in Nagasaki. His assignment helped design and supervise work on an oil tanker for the Imperial Navy. The war has stretched everyone thin. Engineers are as much soldiers as the men in uniform now. He walks along the dirt path leading toward the shipyard, a folded lunch cloth tucked inside his case, a slide rule wrapped carefully in paper, his company pass in his pocket. Around him, the city moves like any other morning, women washing steps, a cyclist wobbling by with a sack of rice strapped to the back, a boy in a too large cap pushing an empty cart hoping for work. Then he freezes. He pats his chest, then his belt. His company stamp, his hanko, is missing. Without it, he can't enter official documents, can't complete the final paperwork that will let him go home. He stops dead in the road, frowns, and turns back the way he came, dust puffing softly around his worn shoes. It's such a small decision it barely registers in his mind. A forgotten seal. A few minutes' delay. As he retraces his steps, the city clock ticks toward 8:15. The sky above Hiroshima is a hard, bright blue, unmarred by cloud. High, impossibly high, a lone B-29 bomber drones across that empty canvas, almost invisible to the thousands of eyes below. Air raid sirens had wailed earlier, but they've gone quiet again. One plane does not make a raid. People have grown used to false alarms. Yamaguchi reaches the field beside a drainage canal, a wide-open space he has crossed countless times, and glances up, momentarily annoyed at the sound cutting through the cicada's din. He squints, hand raised to shield his eyes from the glare. He sees it, a tiny silver speck, a faint glimmer against the blue, and then strangely a second point. Something falling, drifting downward beneath the plane's path. It looks like a metal cylinder at first, then like a toy, then like nothing he can quite understand. A dark shape trailing a small, delicate parachute. He frowns. What kind of bomb comes down that slowly? The answer arrives as light. For a fraction of a second, there is no sound, no heat, no movement. Just a sudden, impossible white that erases color, shadow, distance, everything. It's as if the sun has dropped from the sky directly into the heart of Hiroshima, and for that instant, there is only brilliance. Yamaguchi's instincts, honed by years of air raid drills, scream louder than his thoughts. He throws himself into the irrigation ditch at the edge of the field arms over his head, fingers clawing at the earth. You, watching from just behind his shoulder, feel the rough concrete scrape his palms. The smell of wet mud and stagnant water fill his nostrils. Then the world slams back. Heat, like the breath of a furnace door torn open, cuts across his exposed skin. His white-shirted back lights up in agony as if someone has pressed a branding iron against it. The air itself seems to ignite. The sound follows half a heartbeat later, a low-rising roar that becomes a monstrous crash, like 1,000 thunderclaps stacked on top of each other and dropped from the sky. The blast wave hits. The field, the road, the houses beyond are swallowed in a storm of wind and debris. Glass shatters into dust. Roof tiles turn into shrapnel. Wooden beams snap like matchsticks and sail through the air. The pressure crushes into the ditch, slamming Yamaguchi down, driving the breath from his lungs. His ears ring with a high, thin whine, and for a moment he can no longer tell if he's still alive or already fading into that white void. He smells his own skin burning. His hands, the back of his neck, the side of his face. Any part of him that was exposed to the flash is seared, blistering in seconds. His eardrums rupture with a pop he doesn't quite hear. The briefcase that held his instruments, his lunch, his papers gone. Vaporized, torn away, or buried under what used to be Hiroshima. He doesn't yet know what has happened. He only knows that the city is screaming. When the first roar dies down, replaced by the crackle of fires and the distant crash of collapsing buildings, Yamaguchi drags himself up onto his knees. His vision is a blur of afterimages. Wherever he looks, that blinding flash still burns in his eyes. The air is thick with dust and ash, turning the bright morning into a gray-brown twilight. Where there had been houses, there are now heaps of splintered wood and twisted tile. Telephone poles lie broken like felled trees. A woman stumbles past him, her kimono in tatters, hair-singed skin hanging from her outstretched arms in strips like melted wax. She makes no sound, her mouth open in a silent howl that never quite reaches her throat. Yamaguchi tries to stand and nearly collapses again as a wave of dizziness crashes over him. Blood runs warm down his legs, where shards of glass have embedded themselves. He presses a burned hand against the side of his head and feels the sticky mat of his own hair scorched and clumped. Somewhere behind the ringing in his ears, someone is calling for help. Someone else is praying, voice hoarse and broken. A baby is crying a thin, insistent wail that cuts through the smoke. He is an engineer, not a soldier. He has never carried a rifle, never charged an enemy line. But as he gazes across the flattened quarter of the city, the distant rising column of an inhuman mushroom cloud boiling up into the sky, he understands on some gut level that the war has changed into something no one is prepared for. He staggers forward, driven by one thought that somehow cuts through the pain and confusion like a razor. Home, Nagasaki. His wife, his little boy. He has to get back to them. He doesn't know it yet, but somewhere far to the southwest, the city he calls home waits quietly its own fate, already written in the invisible script of the war. And Tsutomu Yamaguchi, freshly torn from the heart of one sunburst, is about to begin the journey that will carry him from one atomic hell to another. The road out of Hiroshima. He takes one step and almost falls. His legs don't feel like they belong to him. They're shaking weak, as if the blast has stolen not just his balance, but some part of his will. The burns on his face and arms throb with every heartbeat raw and exposed to the hot, ash-choked air. But he forces himself forward. The drainage ditch behind him is already filling with people, some crawling, some being dragged. A man in a shredded work uniform clutches the stump of his arm, blood pumping between his fingers. A schoolgirl in a navy blue uniform sits in the mud staring at her own hands as if she doesn't recognize them. The skin blistered and peeling away. You move with Yamaguchi through the broken street. Every breath tastes of dust and smoke, gritty on the tongue. The sunlight is dim now, filtered through the rising column of debris. Somewhere flames have started. Tongues of orange flicker between the wreckage, feeding on wood paper flesh. He has to get to the shipyard. He doesn't fully know why that's his first destination duty habit. The need to find his colleagues, but his feet carry him in that direction, skirting toppled walls, stepping over broken beams. Where there were neat rows of houses an hour ago, there are now flattened skeletons and open foundations. The insides of people's lives spilled into the street, a child's toy, a broken teapot, a photograph scorched black at the edges. At one intersection, he stops, chest heaving. A tram lies on its side in the middle of the street, windows blown out, its metal body crumpled like paper. Bodies are scattered around it like discarded dolls, twisted, burned, some still smoldering. A woman leans against the wreck, cradling something in her arms. As Yamaguchi gets closer, he realizes it's not something. It's someone, a child, limp hair burned away. The woman rocks back and forth, whispering the same words over and over. He doesn't need to hear clearly to understand. It's just a name. He looks away and keeps moving. It takes him far longer than it should to reach the Mitsubishi yard. The gate is gone, blown inward, twisted metal hanging from one hinge. The guardhouse is a collapsed pile of timber and shattered glass. Of the buildings beyond, many are partially standing, their walls caved-in, roofs peeled back as if by a giant hand. A few men cluster in the yard, faces gray with dust and shock. One of them recognizes him, Yamaguchi-kun. The voice comes from a portly man with wire-rimmed glasses cracked down the middle. It's his supervisor, Kuniyoshi Sato. Blood seeps from a cut on Sato's forehead, tracing a dark line down the side of his nose. "You're alive," Sato says, as if he can't quite believe his own words. "So are you." Yamaguchi manages his throat, dry and raw. They stand there for a moment, just looking at each other, two survivors in a sea of ruin, trying to piece together a world that has been torn apart in a single instant. "We have to get to the shelter," Sato says finally. "The clinic's something. You're burned." Only now, with someone else's eyes on him, does Yamaguchi really register the extent of his injuries. His shirt is scorched and torn across the back. His arms are a patchwork of red and white, blistered in places, blackened in others. His left ear feels as though it's been half melted. They move as a group, a handful of Mitsubishi employees, stumbling through the broken streets, helping each other when one falters. Above them, the column of smoke and dust has thickened into a towering, mushroom-shaped cloud, its stem rooted in the heart of what used to be downtown Hiroshima. You can feel the surreal horror of it, this monstrous shape rising into the sky, while at street level, people crawl, stagger, and burn. They find a makeshift aid station in what remains of a school building. The windows are all blown out. Desks lie in tangled piles. Blood streaks the floor, sticky underfoot. A young doctor, barely older than Yamaguchi, moves from patient to patient with a bandage roll and a bottle of iodine that's already nearly empty. "Sit," the doctor orders without looking up. When he does glance at Yamaguchi's burns, his eyes widen just a fraction before he covers it with professional calm. "You're lucky," he says quietly. "You were further out." Lucky? The word hangs in the air, absurd, obscene. The doctor wraps Yamaguchi's upper body in gauze, the fabric sticking to the raw flesh. Every touch sends a fresh wave of pain through him, hot and electric. He clenches his jaw and says nothing. Around him, people groan, whimper, call out for mothers, fathers, children who will never answer. As afternoon turns to evening, the sky darkens unnaturally. Soot and ash drift down like black snow. Then the rain starts, thick, heavy drops that splatter on the broken ground, staining it with oily, inky streaks. People tilt their heads back, letting the strange, dirty rain wash over their burned skin, desperate for any relief from the heat. Yamaguchi doesn't know the words radiation fallout. He only knows that the world has become sick, poisoned in ways no one understands. In the flickering light of candles and oil lamps, he finds a corner to rest in. Sato sits beside him, shoulders slumped. "My family?" Sato murmurs. I don't know if he stops, unable to finish. "Nagasaki," Yamaguchi says, voice hoarse. "My wife and son are in Nagasaki. I have to get back to them." In this, Sato gestures weakly toward the shattered city. "How the trains?" "There has to be a way," Yamaguchi insists. The thought of his wife Hisako and their little boy Katsutoshi waiting for news that may never come turns the pain in his body into something secondary, almost irrelevant. If he dies here in this ruined city, they will never know why he vanished. The night is a blur of fitful sleep and waking nightmares. Each time he closes his eyes, he sees the flash again, that devouring white. Each time he opens them, he is still in the middle of its aftermath. At dawn on August 7th, he and two co-workers from Mitsubishi, both burned, both limping, make a decision. They will try to reach the railroad lines on the outskirts and find any train, any carriage that can carry them away from Hiroshima, toward home. The journey to the station is like walking through the skeleton of the world. Bridges sag, rails are twisted, bodies lie along the embankment, some huddled in groups, others alone, arms outstretched as if reaching for help that never came. The air smells of wet ashes and something sweeter and more terrible beneath it. At what used to be Hiroshima Station, they find chaos soldiers, civilians, railway workers all moving in a slow, stunned current. Parts of the station are leveled, but some tracks still lie straight enough to use. There are whispers half disbelieving that special trains are being assembled to evacuate the wounded and any who can move on their own. By some mixture of persistence, desperation, and the simple fact that they can still walk, Yamaguchi and his colleagues manage to climb into a crowded carriage. There are no seats left. They sit on the floor pressed shoulder to shoulder with strangers, their bandages already stained through. The train lurches forward with a grinding shriek, pulling away from the broken city. As Hiroshima recedes behind them, a low murmur passes through the carriage. Some people pray. Others just stare at their hands, their feet the floor, as if afraid to look outside at the passing landscape. You sit there with him, feeling the sway of the train, the heat of bodies packed too tightly together, the dull ache of burns beneath rough cloth. Each mile that passes seems to put a little more distance between him and that white sun, but not between him and what it did to him. Hours later, after transfers delays and the slow crawl of a crippled rail network, he sees familiar landmarks, hills he knows, rivers whose names he can still recall, despite the fog in his mind. Nagasaki. On August 8th, as evening settles over the city, Tsutomu Yamaguchi steps off the train and onto the platform, bandaged and burned but alive. The war is far from over. The world does not yet know the name Hiroshima as a synonym for annihilation. And in this quieter port city tucked among the hills, life goes on: air raid drills, ration lines, factory whistles. He is home. And in less than 40 hours, another sun will fall from the sky. August 8, 9th, 1945, home disbelief and a second sun. Nagasaki Station smells of coal smoke and damp wood. Compared to Hiroshima, it feels almost indecently normal. The platform is crowded but orderly, porters weaving through with handcarts, mothers fussing over children, soldiers slinging their packs. The war is here too, but it hasn't arrived all at once in a single burst of light. Bandaged and stooped, Tsutomu Yamaguchi steps down from the carriage and blinks at the familiar hills rising around the city. The air is cooler here, washed by the sea. For one dizzying moment, he has the strange sensation that Hiroshima was a fever dream, something his mind invented. Then a movement sends pain lancing across his burned back and arms, and the illusion shatters. He walks home slowly, each step a negotiation with his wounds. The streets of Nagasaki are intact. Houses stand straight. Streetcars rattle by. Factory whistles sound in the distance, calling workers to shifts at Mitsubishi's plants. The shipyard, the steel foundry, the arms works clustered around the harbor and the Urakami Valley. No one here has seen a city vanish in a single flash. At the door of his modest house in the Urakami district, his hand shakes as he reaches for the latch. Before he can touch it, the door slides open. His wife Hisako stands there, eyes wide, one hand clutching her kimono closed at the throat. Their little boy, 3-year-old Katsutoshi, peers around her legs, thumb in his mouth. For a heartbeat, they all just stare. He must look like a ghost, head, bandaged face, blistered clothes, scorched and filthy. Tsutomu, Hisako whispers. Her voice breaks on the second syllable. He tries to smile. It comes out as more of a grimace. "I'm home," he manages. Then she is on him, arms around his shoulders, careful of the bandages, but unable not to cling. He feels her shaking. Katsutoshi toddles forward and grabs his father's trouser leg, looking up with solemn, confused eyes. "You're hurt?" Hisako says, pulling back to study his burns. "What happened? Was it a raid? Your letter? There hasn't been?" He sinks down onto the tatami, inside the familiar smell of the house wrapping around him, soy rice, the faint salt of drying laundry. He feels heavier than he ever has in his life. It wasn't a raid, he says, it was... The words feel too small for what he's trying to describe. The whole city. One bomb. Hisako frowns, not understanding. How could she? There are no words yet for what Hiroshima has become. but she listens while he speaks in a low, hoarse voice, telling her about the white flash, the wind that tore buildings apart, the fires, the people walking with their skin hanging from their arms. He finds himself leaving things out, softening edges, because he sees the way her hands tremble, as she pours tea, the way she glances at their son, as if to reassure herself that he is still solid, still here. That night, a local doctor looks at his burns, clucking under his breath. Supplies are scarce, and what he can do is limited fresh bandages, ointment made thin by rationing. You should rest, the doctor tells him firmly, at least a few days. Those are severe burns. But dawn on August 9th finds Yamaguchi pulling on his uniform again with stiff, clumsy fingers. Every movement hurts. The gauze sticks to his skin. He grunts softly, trying not to wake Hisako, as she dozes in the corner with their son curled against her. When she does stir and see him tying his belt, her brow furrows. "You're going to work." "I have to report," he says. Duty is part of it, but so is something else. A desperate need to tell someone in authority what he has seen. Mitsubishi needs to know what happened in Hiroshima. If that weapon comes here. She glances toward the window where the morning light is just beginning to seep around the edges of the shutters. Outside, Nagasaki is waking up like any other morning. "It won't," she says, but there's a catch in her voice. "Please be careful." He promises he will and steps out into the pale light. The tram ride toward the Mitsubishi offices is a study in contrasts. Around him, workers gripe about rationing, about long shifts, about rumors of Soviet movements in the north. Someone mentions hearing that an entire city was destroyed, but the story sounds impossibly exaggerated, another piece of Wild War gossip. Yamaguchi sits in silence, gripping the metal pole, feeling the rattle of the tram through his sore muscles. He wants to shout at them, tell them it's all true, and more, that no rumor can capture the reality of a city turned into a furnace. But he is too tired, and his throat still feels scraped raw. The Mitsubishi headquarters building in Nagasaki is a solid, modern structure of reinforced concrete several stories high, not far from the Urakami district. It feels to his traumatized senses like a fortress. Walls, windows, desks, neatly in a row. Men in shirt sleeves bent over drafting tables. For an insane moment, he wants to believe that just being inside this building makes him safe from the kind of power he saw unleashed in Hiroshima. His supervisor in Nagasaki Section Chief Yoshida stares when Yamaguchi walks into his office. "Good God, man, what happened to you?" Yamaguchi bows stiffly. "Sir, I was in Hiroshima on the 6th. They sit. A couple of senior engineers join them, their notebooks open, pencils ready. They've heard whispers, half-formed reports, but nothing from an eyewitness they trust. Yamaguchi's burns are their first undeniable proof that something far beyond conventional bombing occurred. He describes it as best he can: the single aircraft, the falling object, the blinding flash, the heat that seemed to peel the skin from his bones, the shockwave that leveled whole districts, the fires, and the black rain. As he speaks, the room grows very quiet. "That's impossible," one engineer mutters almost to himself. "One bomb can't do that." "I saw it," Yamaguchi replies more sharply than he intends. He leans forward, bandages rustling. "I thought I was dead. Everyone did. Hiroshima is gone, Yoshida-san." His supervisor rubs his temples, frowning. "Even if what you say is true, and I don't doubt you, Yamaguchi-kun, it must be some special circumstance. They couldn't do that again so soon." Yamaguchi opens his mouth to answer, and then stops. Because outside the window, the air raid siren starts to wail. The sound rises and falls, that now familiar, mournful howl. In most cities by August 1945, people have become numb to it. Often it means nothing. Often the bombers pass overhead on their way to some other target. The men in the office exchange tired glances. "It's probably just reconnaissance," one says. "We've had them for days." Yoshida waves a hand. "Stay where you are. We'll finish this report, then head to the shelter if necessary. Continue, Yamaguchi-kun." Yamaguchi's mouth feels suddenly dry. His heart picks up speed, not from the siren, but from the eerie familiarity of the scene. A clear morning. A few planes and men who assume that nothing truly terrible can happen from so little. In Hiroshima, he says slowly, there was just one plane overhead when it happened. No big formation, just one. He doesn't finish the sentence. At 11:02 a.m., the room floods with white. The light that crashes through the windows is not sunlight. It is a hard, brutal glare that strips color out of the world, obliterates shadow, and turns every surface into a mirror. The paper on the desks ignites. The glass panes shatter inward in an instant, transforming into knives that slice across faces and arms. Yamaguchi has lived this once already. His body remembers faster than his mind. He throws himself sideways, diving behind a support column just as the shockwave hits. The building shudders like a living thing struck by a hammer. Desks topple. Bookcases leap away from the walls. The floor heaves under him and the ceiling cracks with a sound like the sky being torn open. The air fills with dust smoke and the ragged cries of men who thought they were safe in their solid concrete office. His burns half-healed and raw flare with renewed agony as the heat sears through his clothes again. He curls into himself, arms over his head, the thunder of the blast rolling through his bones. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. 2 cities, 2 suns, and somehow impossibly Tsutomu Yamaguchi is still alive in the middle of both. Nagasaki in ruins and the search for his family. For a few seconds after the blast, there is only noise. A rolling, grinding roar that seems to come from everywhere at once, from the floor, from the walls, from inside his own skull. Dust turns the air into a solid thing you have to breathe through. Papers whirl through the room like panicked birds, some of them already on fire. Tsutomu Yamaguchi feels the floor beneath him buck, then settle. The column he's curled against cracks, showering him with grit. His ears ring with a shrill whistle that drowns out all other sound. He's been here before. Very slowly, he uncurls his body and pushes himself up onto his elbows. The office that moments ago was neat and solid is now a jumble of smashed desks, fallen cabinets, and mangled chairs. The windows are just jagged holes in the walls, their frames twisted. The white glare has faded, replaced by a dim orange half-light and a haze of dust. Yoshida-san, he croaks. His throat tastes of blood and plaster. Shapes move in the murk. A man drags himself free from beneath a fallen bookshelf, blood running down his cheek. Another sits against a wall, staring blankly at the stump where 2 of his fingers used to be. Yamaguchi spots his supervisor under a collapsed beam. He scrambles over the debris, every movement sending knives of pain through his half-healed burns. Together with another engineer, he heaves the beam aside. Yoshida gasps in a lungful of dust-laden air, coughing hard. What was that? Yoshida manages between coughs, eyes wide behind cracked spectacles. One bomb, Yamaguchi says, the words tasting like acid. The same. It's the same as Hiroshima. A silence drops over the men in the ruined office. Outside the city itself, howls, sirens, screams, the growing roar of fire. You can feel the dread settling into Yamaguchi's chest as he turns toward the shattered window. Smoke is already rising in thick pillars from the direction of Urakami. From his vantage point, he can see a swath of the city, flattened roofs, peeled-off telephone poles snapped and thrown aside like toys. And there, somewhere in that roiling cloud of dust and flame, is his home. His wife. His son. He doesn't ask permission, he just moves. Down the stairs, what's left of them, past men clutching at wounds, past someone sobbing for their mother. The stairwell is choked with plaster and smoke. Twice he slips, catching himself on the rail, fresh blood seeping through his bandages, where broken glass has carved into him again. Out on the street, Nagasaki no longer looks indecently normal. It looks like a wounded animal. Buildings are bowed and broken. Walls lean at impossible angles. A tram lies derailed, and half on its side, its metal skin blistered and blackened. Bodies lie where they fell on pavements and ditches in the middle of the road, clothing burned away, skin charred or hanging in loose ribbons. He has seen this before too. But this time the epicenter is his neighborhood. He starts running, or tries. His legs don't really obey, but momentum and terror carry him forward. Around you the city blurs, the crackle of fires, the stink of burning wood and flesh, the low moans of the injured who still have voices left. Water. A man wheezes as Yamaguchi staggers past, reaching with a blistered hand. Please. There is no water. The mains are broken. The wells are choked with debris. A woman kneels beside a shallow pool formed in a bomb crater, cupping the muddy water to a stranger's lips. He pushes on. The closer he gets to Urakami, the worse it becomes. Houses are no longer damaged. They're gone, replaced by piles of smashed timber and tile. The great Urakami Cathedral, a red brick landmark that once towered above the valley, is now a shattered skeleton. Its walls have been blown outward. Its twin spires have collapsed. Stone blocks lie scattered like children's toys stained with dust and blood. Somewhere amid all this, in a modest house on a quiet street, Hisako and little Katsutoshi should be. The street where they live is barely recognizable. The row of houses has been flattened into a continuous tangled wreck. Smoke coils up from pockets of smoldering debris. Everything is a variation of gray and brown and black. For a heartbeat, Yamaguchi stands frozen. There is no door to open, no path to walk. Just destruction piled chest high. His mind wants to shut down, to declare the obvious: no one could survive this. Then he hears it. Tsutomu. The voice is thin, ragged, but unmistakable. He spins, heart hammering so hard, it drowns out the ringing in his ears. Between two overturned beams down in a shallow ditch that once carried rainwater, he sees a familiar shape. Hisako, clothing torn, hair singed, face streaked with soot, is waving one arm weakly above the rubble. With her other arm, she clutches a small bundle to her chest. He scrambles over broken planks and shards of tile, nearly falling twice, until he can drop into the ditch beside her. How his voice breaks! He reaches for her hands, hovering, afraid to hurt her, afraid she'll vanish like smoke. The siren, she gasps. I was taking Katsutoshi to the shelter. Then I saw the plane. It was low. Just one. I thought of your story from Hiroshima and... She swallows, eyes squeezing shut as she remembers. I grabbed him and jumped into the ditch. Then the light came. She opens her arms just enough for Yamaguchi to see their son. The boy's face is smudged, but whole hair singed at the edges, eyes huge and stunned. He looks at his father as if seeing a stranger shaped like a man he knows. All the taut, coiled fear inside Yamaguchi suddenly loosens. His legs go weak. He kneels in the muddy ditch and presses his forehead to his wife's burned shoulder, shoulders shaking. They are alive. All three of them. In the middle of an inferno, they have somehow threaded a path between falling worlds. Above them, strange black drops begin to fall from the sky. Big, fat raindrops that leave dark stains where they land. One splashes on Yamaguchi's sleeve, painting a round blotch on the fabric. Another hits Hisako's cheek. She wipes it away, frowning. It's like Hiroshima, he murmurs. The black rain. He doesn't know that it carries ash, soot, and invisible particles that will linger in their bodies for years. He only knows that it is warm and dirty, and that for a brief moment, it cools the burned skin of his neck. By evening, makeshift shelters spring up in any structure still standing: school gymnasiums, with missing roofs, warehouses with leaning walls. The Yamaguchi family finds space in a half-collapsed building on slightly higher ground. Mats are laid out side by side. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, ointment, and fear. A doctor with hollow eyes and blood up to his elbows examines them by the light of a flickering lantern. Hisako has burns, but no major wounds. Katsutoshi seems almost miraculously untouched, aside from minor cuts. The doctor says when he looks at Tsutomu's bandaged body, the fresh burns layered over old ones. You were in Hiroshima as well. Yamaguchi nods. The doctor stares for a long moment as if looking at some impossible specimen. "You must have been born under a strange star," he says at last. Hisako, exhausted, leans against her husband's shoulder. "Or he's used up all his bad luck now," she whispers, trying to smile. Around them, people murmur, pray, or simply lie, silent, eyes open, staring at nothing. Somewhere outside, a fire crackles. Occasionally, the distant rumble of a collapsing building rolls through the dark like muted thunder. You lie there with him on the hard mat, every bone aching burns, throbbing in a steady rhythm, the smell of smoke still clinging to your hair. 2 cities, 2 blasts, and yet your heart is still beating. In the days to come, the fever will come. The hair will fall out. The strangers' faces around you will change, some fading away entirely. The war itself will end in a sudden, almost anticlimactic announcement. But tonight, in this crowded, broken shelter, all Tsutomu Yamaguchi can do is pull his wife and child closer and listen to their breathing in the dark, as if that sound alone is proof that something in this shattered world still works the way it's supposed to. Black rain, invisible wounds, and the day the war ended. Morning in the shelter comes without sunlight. Dust and smoke still hang over Nagasaki, turning the sky a flat, dirty gray. A few pale beams of light slip through cracks in the broken roof, painting narrow ladders across the mats and bandages and hollow faces. Tsutomu Yamaguchi wakes to the sound of coughing. Deep, racking coughs that seem to tear at people's insides. Someone nearby retches into a bucket. The smell of vomit mixes with sweat ointment and the metallic tang of blood. For a second, he doesn't remember where he is. Then, the ache in his bones and the tight pull of his burns bring it all back. Hiroshima's flash, Nagasaki's echo. The impossible fact that he is still breathing after both. Hisako stirs beside him. In the dimness, he can see that her lips are dry and cracked a faint, feverish sheen on her forehead. Little Katsutoshi sleeps with his face pressed into his mother's side lashes, dark against his cheeks, one small hand fisted in the fabric of her kimono. "You should rest more," Hisako murmurs when she sees him pushing himself upright. "There are people who need help," he answers, voice hoarse. "We all do what we can." Outside the shelter, the city groans. Over the next few days, Nagasaki becomes a place of lines, for water lines, for rice lines of stretchers. Yamaguchi joins neighbors and strangers alike in digging through rubble with bare hands, looking for anyone still alive beneath the smashed beams. Sometimes they find someone breathing. More often they don't. The black rain has stopped, but it's left its mark, oily streaks on walls, dark pools and craters stained clothes. No one knows what it really is. People argue in low voices. Is it poison? Is it a blessing? A strange gift of water in a burning city? Some drink it. Some wash in it. A few days after the blast, a new kind of sickness slinks through the shelter. It starts with fevers. People who seem to be recovering from burns suddenly grow hot to the touch, shivering despite the August heat. Mouths fill with ulcers. Hair comes away in clumps on the pillow. Purple spots bloom under the skin like spilled ink. One night, Yamaguchi wakes to the sound of a woman sobbing softly. A few mats away, she is cradling the still form of her husband, his face waxy, a trickle of blood dried at the corner of his mouth. There are no visible injuries. He just stopped. Why she keeps whispering to no one in particular? He was fine. He was fine yesterday. Doctors talk about mystery disease, about bomb sickness. No one has the words acute radiation syndrome yet. They only see the patterns, the black rain, the flash, then this slow, treacherous dying. Yamaguchi isn't spared. At first, he blames it on exhaustion. His muscles feel heavy, his joints stiff as if he's aged 20 years in a week. His appetite vanishes. Food, when he can get it, tastes like paper. His burns, which had started to scab, grow angry and weep again. One afternoon, he looks down and sees a smear of blood on his palm. It takes him a moment to realize it's from his own nose. That night, as Hisako combs his hair gently away from his bandages, Small tufts come loose, clinging to the teeth of the comb. She freezes. It's nothing, he lies, even as his stomach knots. My body's just tired. She doesn't answer. Instead, she sets the comb aside, her hands lingering on his shoulders a moment longer than usual, as if she's afraid that if she lets go, he'll vanish. The days blur together, cues for thin rice gruel trips to the makeshift clinic, funerals so hastily arranged that sometimes the names on the wooden tablets are guessed not known. Nagasaki, like Hiroshima, is learning to live with a wound no one knows how to treat. Then on August 15th, the city gathers around radios. It's humid, the air thick and unmoving. Someone has set up a battered receiver in the courtyard of the school, where many of the survivors are sheltering. People sit on benches on stones on the bare ground. Bandages glow ghost pale against tanned skin. Children who no longer flinch at sirens press close to their mother's sides. The radio crackles, static hisses, and then a voice. High, formal, unlike anything most of them have ever heard. Many here have never listened to the emperor speak. Now his words pour into the courtyard, archaic and carefully measured, heavy with phrases that twist and turn. Some people strain to understand the courtly language. Others simply listen for the shape of it, the weight. We have resolved, the voice is saying, to pave the way for a grand peace for all the generations to come. It takes time for the meaning to filter through, for all the talk of endure the unendurable, of bearing the unbearable, to settle into a simple, earth-shaking truth. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. A murmur runs through the crowd like wind through grass. Some people look dazed. Some begin to sob out of relief, out of shame, out of a grief so tangled they can't tell one emotion from another. A man in a worn sergeant's uniform stares at his hands as if someone has just told him they belong to a stranger. Yamaguchi feels Hisako's fingers find his. He squeezes back, feeling the bones under her skin. "It's finished," she whispers, as if afraid saying it too loudly will make it untrue. No more raids, no more bombs like that. He thinks of Hiroshima's flattened streets, of Nagasaki's broken cathedral, of the people who will never hear this broadcast because they're buried in those ruins. "It's finished," he echoes softly. But even as the words leave his mouth, he knows something else. For those who stood under those two suns, the war won't really be over. Not in their bodies, not in their heads, not in the way they see the world every time they close their eyes and remember the white light. In the weeks that follow, occupation soldiers arrive in neat uniforms and clean boots. They bring supplies, doctors' notebooks. Foreign experts with grave faces take measurements, count casualties, sketch diagrams of blast radii and burn patterns. To them, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are also data, grim, invaluable, unrepeatable. One day, a young Japanese doctor at the clinic, his own hands trembling slightly, asks Yamaguchi a series of questions from a clipboard. "You were in Hiroshima on August 6th. "Yes." "And you were within how many kilometers of the hypo center?" He estimates the distance from the shipyard, remembering the canal, the field. The doctor writes it down. "And then, you returned here to Nagasaki before the 9th. "Yes." The doctor looks up, eyebrows knitting. "And you were in the city when the second bomb fell?" Yamaguchi nods. For a moment, the doctor just stares at him as if trying to decide whether he's speaking to a man or to an apparition. Then he exhales slowly and writes something in the margin. "You must take care of yourself," he says at last. "Your body has suffered more than most. We don't yet know what the long-term effects will be." Long-term. The words sound almost luxurious in a city where so many haven't had a short term at all. That night, lying awake on his mat, listening to the distant clank of rebuilding, the soft murmur of neighbors talking in the dark, Yamaguchi stares up at the cracked ceiling and thinks about what it means to survive something like this. He doesn't feel lucky. Lucky men aren't burned twice by suns that fall from the sky. Lucky men don't cough blood and watch their hair come away on their own fingers. But he is alive, and somewhere deep inside, under the pain and the fear, a thought begins to take shape, still vague, still fragile, that if he has walked through both of these fires and come out the other side, maybe that survival has to mean more than just drawing breath. Maybe it has to be used someday to tell others what it looked like when the world learned how to end cities in a single instant. For now, though, he turns toward his sleeping wife and child, listens to their breathing, and lets that simple, ordinary sound anchor him to the idea of a future. A long life beneath two shadows. The first winter after the bombs is a thin one. In Nagasaki, snow settles in the hollows of shattered walls and on the blackened ribs of ruined houses. It softens, edges, hides, burns, makes everything briefly deceptively clean. But underneath the city is still broken a place of missing fathers, empty seats at dinner photographs on family altars, with incense burned down to stubs. Tsutomu Yamaguchi wraps his threadbare coat tighter around himself as he walks to the makeshift office where he now works as a translator for the occupation authorities. His burns have mostly scarred over. His hair has grown back thinner than before, streaked with gray that hadn't been there in 1945. His hearing in his left ear is permanently dulled, like the world on that side is speaking from the far end of a tunnel. Wikipedia. Inside, the air smells of damp paper and cigarette smoke. American officers sit at desks cluttered with files, their khaki uniforms pressed, boots polished. Japanese clerks move quietly between them, arms full of documents stamped and re-stamped. English and Japanese intermingle in the air, sharp consonants, rolling vowels, the universal language of bureaucracy. Yamaguchi stands beside a young American lieutenant pointing at a map of the harbor. His job now is simple, almost absurd in its smallness, compared to what he's lived through. Turn one language into another. Make sure no one misunderstands where a dock is, which warehouse holds what. Here, the lieutenant says, tapping with his pencil. This pier, it's still structurally sound. Yamaguchi squints at the symbol and answers in slow, careful English. Yes? Damage? Only small. Can repair. The lieutenant nods, makes a note. To him, this is rebuilding logistics numbers, tonnage schedules. To Yamaguchi, it's something else as well. A chance, however limited, to make the broken city stand again. Years slide by, marked by small domestic milestones rather than sirens. He leaves the translation job, goes back to Mitsubishi, once again sketching the smooth curves of oil tankers on drafting paper. His hands, though scarred, remember the motions easily. Hisako's hair grays. They have more children. The house in Urakami is rebuilt, modest and sturdy, with a small garden where Katsutoshi and his sisters chase dragonflies in summer. In 1957, on a humid day that smells of ink and sweat, he stands in a government office holding a thin booklet. It's his Hibakusha certificate, official recognition that he is an explosion-affected person of Nagasaki. The clerk behind the counter barely looks up as he slides it across. Just another survivor in a line that stretches down the hallway. Wikipedia. There is no mention of Hiroshima in the document. For a long time, Yamaguchi doesn't argue. The paper gives him access to extra rations, medical care, a small measure of security in a society that often looks sideways at Hibakusha, fearing hidden sickness-tainted blood. He is grateful to be working, to be relatively strong, to tuck his children into bed at night. If the government prefers his story to be a single wound instead of two, he is willing to let it lie. He doesn't talk about Hiroshima much, even at home. When he does, it's usually in broken pieces, a memory that slips out while pouring tea, a half-finished sentence over the sound of rain on the roof. His children grow up knowing that their father saw the flash twice. But the details are hazy, as if covered by the same thin ash that once fell from those dark skies. AP News. Time does its slow, ambivalent work. The scars on his skin fade from angry red to pale, ropey lines. The nightmares never disappear completely, but they visit less often. In public, he is an unremarkable man. A draftsman on the tram with a lunch pail, a father at a school sports day clapping politely, a neighbor sweeping fallen leaves from the front step. Inside his body, though, the bombs keep their own ledger. Cataracts cloud his eyes earlier than they should. Blood tests bring murmured words from doctors, leukemia, radiation-related phrases, delivered with the same helpless tone they used the first days after the blasts. Wikipedia. In his 70s, the friends who once shared crowded mats with him in those post-war shelters begin to vanish one by one. Cancer, heart failure, diseases that arrive quietly and stay. At funerals, he bows his head, incense curling around him like ghost smoke, and feels the thinning ranks of those who remember what it looked like when two suns fell. It is in this late season of his life, when most men are already shrinking into private routines, that something in Yamaguchi shifts. One rainy afternoon, he sits at the low table in his living room, a pen poised over crisp, lined paper. Outside, water patters steadily from the eaves. His hands knotted with age, and old burns move slowly but firmly. Kanji characters appear under the tip of the pen, neat and precise. He is writing not engineering diagrams now, but sentences about that August sky in Hiroshima, about the way glass can become dust, about the black rain and the hospital corridors, and the sound of his child breathing beside him in the dark ruin of Nagasaki. The book that emerges part memoir, part meditation is titled Ikesarateru Inochi, A Life Well Lived. Wikipedia. It is not a grand sweeping history, just one man's account of living under two mushroom clouds and then trying stubbornly to live beyond them. He follows it with poetry, short, sharp pieces, where rivers carry corpses and yet still reflect the moon. Engagement, Virginia. Invitations start to arrive. In 2006, his granddaughter helps him button his shirt for a special trip. His fingers fumble at the collar. She brushes them away gently and finishes the job. They are going to a screening of a documentary about people like him, double-bombed survivors, shown not just in Japan, but at the United Nations in New York. Wikipedia. He doesn't make that overseas journey himself, but he records messages, gives interviews, sits under hot lights, telling strangers with cameras about mornings that still splinter his dreams. When asked why he speaks now after decades of relative silence, he answers slowly, choosing words the way an engineer chooses the right gauge of steel. The reason I hate the atomic bomb, he says in one interview, is because of what it does to the dignity of human beings. Wikipedia. In 2009, at 93, already feeling the gnawing ache of the stomach cancer that will soon carry him off, he receives word from Tokyo. The government has officially recognized him not only as a Nagasaki survivor, but as a Hiroshima one as well. He is on paper what he has been in flesh and memory for 64 years, the only person formally acknowledged as having lived through both atomic blasts. Wikipedia. He holds the new certificate in his hands, the paper thin and official. It is in one sense just another document stamped and filed decades late. In another, it is a kind of strange vindication not of his suffering, which needs no validation, but of his duty to speak. My double radiation exposure is now an official record, he tells a reporter. It can tell the younger generation the horrifying history of the atomic bombings even after I die. Wikipedia. You can picture him then, an old man in a small Nagasaki house, scars faded, but still there sitting by a window where the light falls across his notebook. Outside the city is rebuilt tram lines, humming ships, slipping in and out of the harbor, children laughing on their way home from school. Inside, beneath the quiet, he still carries two mornings, one in Hiroshima at 8:15 a.m., another in Nagasaki at 11:02. He survived them both, lived a long life under their shadows. And now, near the end of that life, he is finally fully using the one thing the bombs could not take from him, his voice. The Unluckiest Man and the Weight of Witness. Winter again, this time more than 6 decades after the bombs. Outside the hospital in Nagasaki, the sky is the same color it was in 1945, low gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Inside, the light is fluorescent and thin. Machines beep softly. Curtains whisper when nurses pass. Tsutomu Yamaguchi lies in a narrow bed near the window, a blanket pulled up to his chest. His hands rest on top of it, still broad and work-worn, despite the IV taped to one wrist. The scars on those hands are pale now, like faint writing that time tried and failed to erase. Stomach cancer, the doctors have said. At 93, the body that walked through 2 atomic blasts has finally met something it cannot outlast. Wikipedia. He doesn't fear death the way he once did. After the white light over Hiroshima, after the second sun over Nagasaki, everything else seems quieter. But he feels a different kind of urgency now, not to keep breathing, but to keep speaking while he still can. A nurse slides the door open. "Yamaguchi-san," she says gently, "your visitors from overseas are here." 2 men step in, shaking the rain from their coats. One is Canadian film director James Cameron, the other writer Charles Pellegrino. They have flown halfway around the world to sit at the bedside of this old engineer from Nagasaki, to hear him talk about mornings that still shape the way the planet thinks about war. Wikipedia. They speak through an interpreter and through his daughter Toshiko, who sits by the bed, her notebook, open pen, ready. "You want to make a film?" Yamaguchi asks, his voice raspy but steady. "We want to tell what happened," Cameron replies. What it meant, what it still means. Yamaguchi studies them for a moment, eyes clouded by cataracts, but still sharp underneath. He has seen many people come and go with notebooks and microphones. Some wanted facts. Some wanted horror. A few, he thinks, truly wanted understanding. "I think it is your destiny," he says at last, each word careful, "to make a film about nuclear weapons." Wikipedia. Outside, rain begins to tap against the window. Inside, he talks about the forgotten Hanko that pulled him back toward the blast in Hiroshima, about the office in Nagasaki filling with white light while his boss called him crazy, about the way black rain feels when it lands on burned skin. He does not tell them everything. No single conversation, no single film can hold all of it. But he gives them enough to carry away images, sounds, a sense of the way the world can end in an instant, and yet keep turning afterward, expecting you to live in it. Months earlier, in a quieter Tokyo office, a clerk had stamped another piece of paper with a neat official seal. That day, the Japanese government finally acknowledged what his body had known since 1945. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a hibakusha of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the only person on record to stand in the blast zones of 2 atomic bombs and live. Wikipedia. He had held the new certificate in his hands, the paper light but strangely heavy. "My double radiation exposure is now an official government record," he told a reporter. "It can tell the younger generation the horrifying history of the atomic bombings, even after I die." Wikipedia. That after is very close now. On January 4th, 2010, with snow in the hills above Nagasaki and the harbor wrapped in winter mist, his long, scarred life finally ends. He is 93 years old. Wikipedia. The man who walked out of 2 nuclear hells dies in an ordinary hospital bed. No flash, no blast, just the soft exhale of a single breath leaving his body and not returning. But the story doesn't stop there. You move forward in time just a little and the scene shifts to a television studio in London. Bright lights, laughter. The BBC quiz show QI flashes a caption on the screen, "The Unluckiest Man in the World." They are talking about Tsutomu Yamaguchi, turning the double exposure to atomic fire into a dark punchline. Jokes about bombs bouncing off. An audience laughs at something that happened far away long ago to people whose pain they have never seen. Wikipedia. In Nagasaki, his daughter Toshiko watches a clip later on Japanese news, her jaw tight. She hears strangers make light of mornings that burned her father's skin and twisted his dreams for the rest of his life. "I cannot forgive the atomic bomb experience being laughed at," she says on national television. "I think this shows that the horror of the atomic bomb is not well enough understood in the world." Wikipedia. In that moment, you can see the inheritance, not just of scars and fragile blood, but of a task: to explain, to correct, to insist that these were not jokes, not statistics, but days when human bodies met physics at its most merciless. The camera at the studio cuts to a still photograph of Yamaguchi in his old age, thin, bespectacled, a faint, wry smile on his lips. Unluckiest man in the world, they called him. You know better now. You remember the way he held his son in a muddy ditch while black rain fell. The way he sat at a low table in his living room, writing lines of poetry about rivers that carried corpses yet still reflected the moon. The way he told journalists in his 80s that he hated the atomic bomb because of what it does to the dignity of human beings. Wikipedia. Unlucky, yes, but also something else necessary. Chosen by fate or chance to be a bridge between the age before mushroom clouds and the world that came after. Now move again to a lecture hall decades later. At the front of the room stands a woman holding a microphone, his granddaughter Kosuzu Harada. Behind her, projected on a screen, is an old black and white photo of Tsutomu and Hisako young and serious in their wartime clothes. Next to it, another image, the boiling cloud over Nagasaki. She speaks to students about the morning her grandfather described a Hiroshima sunrise to his skeptical boss, only to watch a second sun fall over Nagasaki minutes later. She talks about his burns, his silence, his late life decision to stand in front of cameras and beg the world to understand. She shares her own mission now to carry his testimony to argue for a world that will never again create people like him. AP News. In another city far away, the grandson of Jacob Beezer, the American radar specialist who flew on the bombers over both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, tells his own audiences about the man his grandfather became afterward, weighed down by what he helped unleash. Together, these grandchildren work for peace, for disarmament, for a future where no one has to learn the vocabulary of black rain and double hibakusha. AP News. Look around that lecture hall. Some students fidget. Some lean forward, brows furrowed. Somewhere near the back, someone who always thought of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as dates in a textbook suddenly imagines a man crouched in a ditch, feeling his own skin burn. The story has moved again from the man who lived it to the child who watched him bandage his scars to you who are hearing it now. And this is where you come in, because you're not just a viewer watching grainy footage and listening to a distant narrator. You are sitting right now with the knowledge that one man saw two cities disappear into white light and still chose for the rest of his long life to get up, go to work, raise children, plant a garden, learn new words like leukemia, and still say, "This must never happen again." August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m., Hiroshima. August 9, 1945, 11:02 a.m., Nagasaki. Two coordinates. Two instants when the world learned how easy it is to end everything. And one man burned, scarred, often sick, but stubbornly alive, who spent his borrowed years turning those instants into a warning. He survived Hiroshima. He lived through Nagasaki. What you do with his story now is up to you.